Might be a good idea.
Thanks for the reminder. That's what it was on my list.
Thanks.
Well, I think that's the reason why I need to jump in now. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning. I don't think we have anyone who is the morning time in this group. I'm Lennon Cheng. I'm a senior lecturer at Monash University. I'm now, of course, working with UPNet to run this forum under the supervision of Brian. No, but this is more an informal discussion, and we just want to use this opportunity to keep the ball rolling, and probably like Upuni said, we'll talk about different issues on smart justice, as well as the idea that we're proposing at the moment to establish a Asia Institute in India. So we probably want everyone to have some brainstorming as well as to take part as a founding member. So it's about me. Do we have Professor Pangda? Pangda?
Yes, Professor Pandey is there with us. Professor Pandey, can you hear us?
Yes, I do. It's perfect. Chang.
Would you a little bit of introduction of yourself?
I've been currently I've been a professor of criminal law, criminology, and so many traits in criminal justice issues. And currently I'm doing a writing on advanced criminal justice. And in that context, I've been working on, I was enamored by the participatory defense initiative in the US courts. And one reason why the criminal justice becomes unduly harsh is the disconnect between the court's perception of justice and the people's perception of justice. I relate it to minorities and lower caste and tribals perception of justice. If there could be a better connect between the realities in which crime thrives, in which the normative crime thrives, and it comes before the court, like what has been done by participatory defense initiative in the US courts, maybe that could in a way bring a restorative justice in a different form. The courts will be aware of the realities in which crime emerges and thrives. And therefore, I'm particularly interested in this group working on this. Smart justice is because of disconnect between formal courts and the crime realities. So if the realities were brought before the courts, and how the crime thrives in the society. If this is known better than what the advocates manage to do. Advocates are doing it for the money they get. But if voluntary initiative is taken and the plight of minorities, lower caste, tribals, who are involved mostly in India in crimes, they rate almost more than 51% of the crime under trial prisoners come from these groups. So if their realities are before the courts, maybe court is able to appreciate it better and deliver better justice. This is my take from the Restorative Justice Meet, and this is why I have come to learn from John Brathwaite. John Brathwaite was to deliver a lecture. I wanted to learn from John. John has been a great friend from. Yes, John. Thank you.
Should we pass it to John then? Although I don't think you need to introduce yourself.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you, Lennon. And thank you, Professor Pandey. I've learned so much from you over the years and from this wonderful, distinguished group of colleagues here. How great it is to be with you. And I also want to acknowledge the elders of this Yuin land from which I speak, that always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Well, I'm going to speak about some of my latest ideas, so you'll hear what I'm thinking about these days soon.
I'll just go in around my screen. So next one will be Professor Seth. Jyoti.
Yeah, hi. I am an academic by training. I've been teaching sociology for the last 36 years. I just retired. But for the last 20 years, I've been very involved with gender issues. I'm a gender trainer as well. I'm on the trustee board of Jaguri Dharamshala, which is a feminist organization, an NGO. And I've been very involved with issues of gender-based violence, and I'm happy to be part of this group today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jyoti. Yeah. So Dr. KP Singh, is that you with the Dell? Dr. KP Singh, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah. Yes, I'm there, Upneet. My name is KP Singh, and I have been this early also when the group visited to Chandigarh. I'm a retired police officer, and during my 35 years of service in police department, I had the opportunity to work in prison department on deputation for 5 long years. So I have experience both. I handle the accused persons, the offenders of law as a police officer, as well as I have the opportunity to deal with them as a prison administrator. So I have seen both the facets of the problem. And smart justice is a new concept in India, although in some way we have introduced it in our criminal procedures by way of plea bargaining, etc., etc. But it has not established yet properly in our criminal justice system. So we will learn a lot from. I'm dedicated entire life as well as teaching law students nowadays, because I have done my PhD in law and teaching law students as well. So it is a great opportunity to be part of the group today, and I'll learn more from the members of the group. Thank you.
Good.
Thank you, Professor Singh. And the next one on my screen will be Dr. John Whitehead.
Hi all, so I'm John Whitehead. I've met some of you at various points, but not all of you. So my work really looks at kind of how to create kind of, better access to both restorative and customary justice in kind of, various Pacific Island nations, really focusing upon this notion of kind of legal colonization or neo-colonization through legal practice and things like that, and how there's still significant challenges to access to justice for many people. So utilizing those traditional ways of doing things, those customary ways of doing things can be so incredibly important, particularly in the Pacific Island region, where we do have these smaller islands that don't have magistrates courts or even police posts. So those traditional roles can be so important. And yeah, just excited to kind of, hear what John's got to say and to meet all of you.
Thanks, John. Professor Xu?
Oh, yes. Actually, I like to see everybody on the screen very much more than I come here to the meeting. Yeah, but I would like to enjoy listen to everybody's speeches. I have been involved in helping the Department of Justice in the past 10 years to set up and to set up the restorative justice programs in Taiwan. Yeah. And last year, the legislative branch passed 3 pieces of legislation that to allow prosecutors to court officials and all the prisons
and the juvenile justice court officials to use restorative justice conferences in Taiwan. So it was the restorative justice is legalized, yeah, in Taiwan. Right now, I also helping the Department of Justice to set up a digital programs. Yeah, I mean to do digital videos for the Department of Justice, so everybody can know what is restorative justice is about. Yeah, so I like to enjoy and listen to everybody's lectures. Yeah, concerning about smart justice. Yeah, okay.
Well, Jim has been very humble. He's actually the father of restorative justice in Taiwan, or we call it the father.
Oh, no. I'm learning all this from John. I'm learning all this from all you guys. Yeah, Brian also. Yeah.
All right, we also have Dr. Suzuki. Masa, over to you.
Hi, hey everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So that's my name is Masahiro Suzuki. So I'm with Central Queensland University. I'm currently work as a lecturer in criminology at College of Law, Criminology and Justice. Like most of you, I mostly write about restorative justice. I'm particularly looking at how young offenders experience restorative justice process and how their experience linked with the desistance from offending. I'm also interested in cross-cultural and comparative criminology, so I'm really excited to be part of this really excellent group. So thank you, everyone.
Okay, so should we pass it back to John?
Have we got everyone?
I think so.
All right, good. Well, I'm going to leave it to our godfather of our group, Brian, and our leaders, Upnit and Lennon, to lead a practical conversation on smart justice and a practical future for restorative justice, including these exciting ideas that I can't wait to hear more detail about on a possible future Asian Institute in India. But my presentation will be more abstract on our topic. And because I do believe in what we should do as a network is aspire to a combination of trying our best to be intellectually serious and being practical on, finding new ways that we can accomplish regional and then global collaboration. So I guess the smartest, especially, I think, I'm wondering if Lennon might have been the author of this, and he was a long time ago now, a PhD student of Peter Grabowski, and Peter with Neil Gunningham wrote a book on environmental regulation called Smart Regulation, which is an influential book. It's about partly about the idea and elaborating the idea of a regulatory pyramid, the idea that when you're trying to change environmental behavior or any kind of business regulation, you start at the base of a pyramid with a dialogic approach, with a collaborative problem-solving approach that puts the problem in the center of the circle, rather as we are committed to doing through restorative justice practice. And you often see smart regulatory pyramids with restorative justice at the base of the pyramid. So you try restorative justice first, and you might try restorative justice second and third again and again to see if you can get it to work before you escalate up to more deterrent justice and ultimately perhaps to incapacitative justice at the peak of a regulatory pyramid. The other important part of that work was the role of third parties in regulation, that we shouldn't think of environmental regulation as just a game that's played between a government regulator and a business that's regulated. We also want environmental groups and all sorts of civil society players to be actors in the process, including, of course, victims of environmental crime and Indigenous groups that have a different way of thinking about restoring the environment, a way of thinking about a river as a stream of life, rather than thinking about a river as an object, for example, as Western thinkers tend to do. So that dialogue with civil society is an important part of it. And another important aspect of Peter Grabowski's work is on the idea of meta-governance. Governance of governance. That's what we mean by meta-governance, governance of governance as a key to smart justice. And I'll also be focusing on that theme. I start by hypothesizing that the impressive meta-analysis results on the effectiveness of motivational interviewing is of a piece with other meta strategies to solve social problems. And I think motivational interviewing is a practical technique that we ought to think of ourselves as using much more when we practice restorative justice. And I characterize those kinds of interventions as interventions that associate low specificity and high contextual responsiveness, and doing that with success. So it may be that testing meta strategies is more fertile than testing strategies of justice and crime prevention. At least that seems true when the meta principles are about attunement with empowering conversations. Now, in the business regulatory literature, what we see in so many business regulatory agencies these days, under the influence of neoliberal thinking about regulation, is that desk audits are increasingly displacing regulatory inspections, so that the regulatory staff, the environmental staff, for example, will do a risk analysis based on a desk audit of information they collect from the company without actually getting their boots wet and going out into their environmental surrounds in which the company operates. So that desk audit is increasingly displacing regulatory inspection. It's displacing empowering conversations in domains like response, and it's making regulation as a result less smart, less relational, less restorative. From the perspective of a restorative approach to prevention, one thing that's less restorative still than desk audit is robo-regulation, as exemplified by the Australian government's robo-debt fiasco. At root, robo-debt was a problem of neoliberal IT consultants, and those of you who don't aware of it, I encourage you to Google robo-debt, one word, and see what a terrible fiasco it was. It was a problem of neoliberal IT consultants selling their wares, so saying our IT can complete your work quicker by cutting your field staff, replacing them with computers operated by central office staff who work with we as consultants. Shortcuts that cut out human participation actually cut out the relationality. That's the essence of smart restorativeness. The AI turn in regulation nudges humans not to think. It nudges them not to heal, not to be relational. My apologies, I've got some cockatoos on my veranda here who might have some critical comment as I speak. So AI risks remaking human regulators to become more like the machines the consultants program. to think more like machines designed to just make work easier. And that's a risk to relational justice posed by the technosocial systems of AI, a risk that restorative justice has an important role in struggling against. In even simpler ways, the risks were always there with templates and checklists. And like AI, these are valuable tools for regulators, for police, but over-reliance on them rewires the brains of street-level state functionaries with templated tick box mentalities that erode wisdom and relational listening. It makes them not smarter, but dumber. Relational regulation works when someone spurns a shortcut to take a high road of reaching out to help with regulatory diplomacy toward fixing a problem. To change behavior, we have to genuinely listen to narratives of non-compliance with law. The listening must lead to agreement on desired outcomes and monitoring progress toward them. That commitment is secured in the motivational interviewing literature, which I'll now try to get some PowerPoints up on that. Yeah. So in motivational interviewing for compliance, the stakeholder rather than the regulator should make the arguments for change. A regulator role is to evoke the stakeholders' own concerns and motivations. To effect this change in approach, listen with empathy, minimize resistance, nurture hope and optimism. So the minimize resistance part is a slogan of motivational interviewing is you should roll with resistance. Meta-analyses of 80 randomized controlled trials show formidable effectiveness of motivational interviewing in changing a wide variety of behavioral outcomes, mostly involving compliance with commitments to desist from harms like drug abuse, gambling, crime. Motivational interviewing has three key dimensions of motivation in this theory, and they are confidence, importance, and readiness. Anne Jenkins' research on aged care regulation in Australia showed the importance of confidence or self-efficacy in regulatory compliance. It's easy to grasp the intuition that we achieve more against our outcomes on those days when we arrive at work with a feeling of confidence that we can tackle them. So clear empirical evidence that self-efficacy of managers and collective efficacy of organizations predicts future regulatory compliance in an industry like the aged care industry. That was hardly a surprise then. Importance as motivational interviewing's second key dimension has a long history in criminology. For example, the consistent predictive power of commitment to obeying the law in various of those hundreds of tedious tests of control theory in criminology. In the motivational interviewing literature, readiness is operationalized by asking stakeholders, how ready are you to make these changes? The readiness empirical insight is based on the finding that ambivalence is the crucial dilemma individuals and corporations face when they consider change. Because people have the feeling that life is short, there are good and bad sides to everything, they often focus on the bad side and take the lazy path of not making a change they know they should bother to make. This insight arrived early in the criminological literature in the brilliant ethnographic work of David Matzer on delinquency and drift. Delinquents are rarely committed to law breaking. Rather, they ambivalently drift between worlds of delinquency and law abidingness. They don't think breaking rules is right so much as they drift into techniques of neutralization that soften the moral bind of law. Restorative and responsive regulators are therefore skilled at what the counselling literature conceives as Rogerian reflective listening, listening that reflects back commitment to achieve outcomes grounded in motivations that are chosen by the speaker. Evidence that restorative justice can help a bit in reducing crime has become more encouraging. Some of the best and most recent studies have been the studies that have had the largest effect sizes. And there have been 7 meta-analyses now, and they're all very different. They all include a lot of studies that show no effect of restorative justice on crime, and then a few studies that have big effects, and a lot of studies that have small effects. And overall, all of these 7 meta-analyses, as different as the inclusion criteria are, converge on that conclusion of only modest effectiveness, but statistically significant effectiveness in each case. And the fact that you've got that repeated statistical significance is a surprising result in one methodological sense, because restorative justice is such a heterogeneous intervention. It empowers stakeholders in the injustice to come up with their own creative ways of repairing the harm and preventing recurrence. And we know that they often come up with really bad ideas. You know, restorative justice conferences have been known to recommend sending young people off to scared straight programs, for example, which the evidence is pretty strong that that's counterproductive. So all of those counterproductive things that sometimes happen in restorative justice conference, that's the downside of empowerment. They won't always be good evidence-based solutions that are chosen through that empowerment. One thing that motivational, but in spite of that, we get these modest effects. So if we can get modest effects, if we can improve the quality of communication about what might be counterproductive, we might be able to do even better over time. One thing that motivational interviewing, restorative justice, smart regulation have in common is that the character of compliance interventions are radically unspecified. They're as diverse as the offender's motivations with motivational interviewing, as wide-ranging as the creativity of stakeholders with restorative justice agreements, and as multiplex as the layers of a smart and responsive regulatory pyramid. So these publications, which I think you can get download on John Braithwaite, most of our publications you can get in a free download, go to those somewhat different ways of thinking about these issues from that which you will find in my past writing. So these are literatures that suggest that evaluating meta strategies, strategies about how to select strategies might make more sense than evaluating strategies. Restorative justice and motivational interviewing are strategies for eliciting strategies through empowerment. Smart regulation is a strategy for ordering strategies sequentially, the pyramidal organization of strategies idea. These are not the only examples in social science where there's evidence that broad strategies for selecting strategies improve problem solving. Problem-oriented policing is another example. Good problem-oriented policing does not prescribe which fixes should be invented in regulatory conversations between local police and local communities. Again, the meta-analyses suggest that problem-oriented policing is a vague and heterogeneous meta-strategies that work. Another is positive deviance. There are risks in best practice. Sure, best practice might work when local contexts are well understood, but usually top top-down reformers do not understand context, local context well. An example of positive deviance in development practice is searching for deviant rural village practices of positive nutrition and encouraging modeling of those practices by others in the village. Following a more fertile or nutritious method of cultivation of one of their respected farmers in their village, or a more nutritious cooking practice invented by one of their loved cooks of their village. So randomized controlled trials show that positive deviance in development practice works better in comparison to village education programs on nutrition best practice. So positive deviance beats best practice. The paradox again is that best practice is a worse practice than the meta practice of searching for positive deviance. Best practice is a worse practice than the meta practice of searching for positive deviance. Positive deviance is something that can work even though it's unknown or little understood by anyone from outside that village. It's radically variable because it is deviant. Partly positive deviance works by the power of model mongering and localism. Partly it works because it appeals to tastes adapted to unique circumstances. It energizes because someone in the community has identified the solution. So it focuses on their assets and knowledge rather than their deficits compared to a best practice from the North Atlantic. The meta strategy of search for positive deviance may be more useful than learning what are the particular forms of positive deviance that worked to improve nutrition in particular villages. To use another example, it's more useful to know that a vague heterogeneous concept like problem-oriented policing works than it is to know that it works because it fixes the street lighting at certain crime hotspots. My final example is, time's up I know, is United Nations peacekeeping. Peacekeeping is also a kind of restorative meta strategy. The data show that peacekeeping works well, and the literature on peacekeeping has also become much better and much more sophisticated in recent times, and has become more optimistic as it has done so. So peacekeeping works well at preventing war and at reducing levels of killing when it is multidimensional. Peacekeeping that's more multidimensional and more meta-strategic is more effective in comparison with peace building targeted on some specific strategy. So meta-strategy beats best practice again. So my conclusion is summary is simply think about focusing on meta-strategies that are smart because they recenter diplomacy, conversational regulation, and localism that's restorative. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Are you there, Len?
I am.
Good.
I haven't fallen asleep. I'm just thinking what John has just mentioned, and there are a few things that's been spinning in my mind.
Yes.
I'll probably let others to ask question first before I throw out my weird questions to John. John.
So you talk about this this approach of kind of, the meta-structural, and I really like how that's really located to particular communities, and it can be really effective there. But when we start to approach that at a more kind of like nationwide approach, doesn't that then start to, in some ways, overburden what is already quite an overburdened criminal justice system, as we start to take this much more individualized approach? And is that not going to be the fundamental tension there, the fact that we don't have the resources for such an individualized approach? Yeah.
Well, I guess, John, we're looking for the resources in the community. So we turn to another literature that I didn't discuss in this presentation, which is the collective efficacy literature, Rob Sampson and the Chicago School of Sociology, a long tradition in criminology that finds that, you know, one of the particularly strong and consistent explanations of why certain communities have less crime is that they have high levels of collective efficacy, and the police play a role in enabling that for sure, so that if people are too afraid to go out on the streets or to go out beyond their homes in the village, which is a circumstance that has occurred in Solomon Islands and other places, in Bougainville, other places in the Pacific at times, then they will be unable to mobilize their collective efficacy as a community, because they won't have that minimal level of safety in which security forces actually do play a useful role in mobilizing. But the real resources are the resources that matter, the resources that deliver in that collective efficacy analysis is resources that come from the community, so that when young people are behaving in a violent way on the streets of a metropolis in the West or in a village in the Pacific, it will be mature adult members of that community who know how to converse in a culturally meaningful way to those young people who will do that work. And I think of the interest that Brian has on night patrols, Noongar night patrols, and in many other First Nations communities throughout Australia, as the kind of effective, empowering collective efficacy practice that's involved. So I don't think overburdening the state is the main game. And that's a big theme in Gunningham and Grabowski's smart regulation. After all, it's these third players of the game. I mean, they come up with all sorts of weird and wonderful Western examples, like in Australia, divers societies in regulating inappropriate exploitation of registered shipwrecks. So we might not have the resources to get government inspectors jumping into the ocean, checking that there's no one rifling in an inappropriately way, pulling apart a shipwreck. But we might do better by mobilizing the professional and the amateur repeat players in the business of diving in the ocean around shipwrecks to be the eyes and ears of community social control of that problem.
Thanks, John. I just got some questions as I'm attending the Myanmar update in the past few days and was trying to think about issues in Myanmar. The first one, linking to what you just mentioned on peacekeeping, peace building related issues, is that how do you think restorative justice can be applied in solving Myanmar's current conflict? And the other question that comes to my mind, along with my research in Myanmar, is we know when we're talking about the third party from either your work or Peter and Grabowski and Gantan's work on smart regulation, is we're talking about Facebook's responsibility, social media's responsibility in old days. Was saying Facebook was supporting genocide for not taking down the hate speech. And now they are sort of saying that Facebook are supporting the military government because they need to follow the law that has been imposed. How do you see these kind of third-party rules in this situation? Would third-party really works, or would it cause more harm than good?
Well, that's a contextual matter. That depends, and in particular, it depends on how robust the contestation of the judgments that Facebook make are. So, there's a tendency, for example, for Facebook to frame terrorism as a Muslim phenomenon. And we know that there have been instances in our region where the Muslims have been more the victims of terrorism, and it's been more Christians or Hindus or Buddhists or someone else who have been the perpetrators of the terrorism. I mean, there's a big literature on that in Kashmir, for example, where you've had people in Kashmir who have not always had their rights respected, and when they're spoken up as Muslim activists, as it were, in defense of their rights, they're at danger because they use a Muslim discourse. They're at danger of being censored as terrorists. So there's no ultimate answer to that other than healthy democratic contestation, to say there are two sides to every one of these arguments. But you know, one of the things I say to my friends in Myanmar is about what not to do, and that's to stigmatize the military. And unfortunately, because the military in Myanmar has behaved so badly, there's a lot of rhetoric out there among the democracy movement in Myanmar about execute all of the leadership of the military junta, thinking them up, you know, sort of a kind of hate speech directed at soldiers. And, you know, what we've learned about peace building is that the better path is that path that's been taken of so many countries of putting the flour in the barrel of the soldier's gun, speaking respectfully to the soldiers, using women a lot in the front line of that, you know, as the military surges forward, especially older women, the mothers. We learnt that in the region in Timor-Leste as well, when there's, you know, huge rock fights going on between two competing groups. If there is a nun that is respected by both groups, what the UN peacekeepers can do in that context is say, a lot of you are injured. You've been struck by very big rocks and you're bleeding badly, and some of your people, let us separate you for long enough to get your wounded off to the hospital. Then into that space, they will bring that nun who can then stand between them, and then the rocks won't continue to be thrown when a nun that they love is trying to talk to both groups about reconciliation. So there's a lot that we've learnt about restorative practices in such highly conflicted circumstances, and we need to have those conversations. Say, you don't need to throw away your principles. You don't need to become less robust, but you can be fully robust in a Gandhian way. That's a path to non-violence.
Thanks, John. Anyone else? Well, as I say, it's a very informal discussion. So,
if I can just, I can't even see myself on the screen, Lennon. Am I there?
you are. I can see you.
All right.
In your lovely red jumper and the original paintings behind you.
Well, I think I'd like to thank you, John, for that expose of what we really need to do for looking at exemplary measures of smart justice. And I love the idea of this positive deviance. I've noted many times in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities, that it is the local knowledge, the knowledge of the and wisdom of the elders and significant other leaders that really enable peace building, restorative justice practices. And although the Western colonization of these communities is there with bureaucracy, it is that positive deviance, their ability to maintain their own dignity, survival, and, if you like, the group fairness that they can resolve crime. We have a lot to learn about moving away, moving away from this colonial and bureaucratic approach that just sees one model fit all, to looking at exemplary practices of deviance, where a community can come up with its own solution. Participatory democracy, had its heyday, I guess, in the Portugal's revolution, the Quiet Revolution, where people took to the streets and said, "We don't want the old leadership. We want a new life, a new way." And you mentioned Timor-Leste. Well, yes, that was another good example of, if you like, international deviance, people doing things their way. And so it brings us to our notions of smart justice, and where we began this conversation was the thought that we, during this period of time and beyond the pandemic, we could still be left with a pandemic of poverty, a pandemic of a lack of thought, of an easy return to the older ways, the ways that really have failed us. And when I think of my local community, the Noongar Nation and the Whadjuk people, 3% of the population, yet 97, 98% of the juvenile justice youngsters are Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, mostly Noongar Whadjuk people. And so returning to the old ways just isn't good enough. We're overcrowding our criminal justice system, overcrowding our police cells, by not always adequately funding the grassroots structures, John, as you and others, by our local patrols, our patrols by elders that take people off the street, that find them a house for the night, that take the beer bottle off of them, because all of those things lead to incarceration here very, very quickly. And so I love the idea of John's this deviance of being different, of having the audacity to think that local people can be exciting in the way that they participate in justice, making fairness accessible without the high cost. We realise in Australia that if you want to go to the Supreme Court or the High Court, you have to have bags of money. If you want to appeal your sentence, you have to have a state council or a Queen's Council, whereas the vast majority of our Aboriginal people in this state don't have the kind of money to defend the most simple crime. And so with my work in Aboriginal communities and in the courts in Perth, we found that a model of restorative justice that allowed stakeholders from each circle, from circles of responsibility taking, circles of support, empowering the voice of lived experience to come through. And those voices of lived experiences will be deviant to the vast majority because other people don't know of those lived experiences. And so we do find that in these unique communities of interest, an exciting opening for smart justice.
Yeah, your intervention, Brian, helps me to see a gap in my answer to Lennon's question, which is that in all of the areas that you've mentioned, whether it's Aboriginal leaders in Perth, Shanano Gusmao and Ramos Horta, with all their flaws, as well in Timor-Leste, or Nelson Mandela in South Africa, these were all leaders who had that capability to put aside stigmatization of their oppressors and to have constructive conversations. Well, what are we going to do now? What's the smart thing to do now? And, you know, that's why you shouldn't use stigmatizing speech about your oppressors, even when they do behave as badly as the Myanmar junta.
Yeah. Thank you.
Because ultimately you got to do a deal with them in Myanmar.
Yes. Well, the same with Afghanistan.
Yeah. Yep. Got to do a deal with the Taliban. Yeah.
Well, it was actually Aung San Suu Kyi was doing in the past few years, of say, but now she become one of those arrested.
Sorry, Lennon, I didn't get all of that.
Sorry?
I didn't hear all of that.
No, I said that suppose Aung San Suu Kyi's role.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, should be like one of those names that just got mentioned. That balance the Myanmar society and taking the junta, the military people back to democracy.
And we've had similar experiences both in the northeast of India as well as in Punjab, with the dialogue with the terrorists in the 90s and establishment of a democratic government. So, I mean, this remark about using stigmatizing speech for even the perpetrators of violence, I think that holds a real key message for building up peace.
And Tamil Nadu, right at the beginning of the Indian state as well. I mean, that's the trouble in our conversation. You know, no one knows about how resentful the people of Tamil Nadu were about, you know, initially at the time of independence were, and you know, the currents that they had for autonomy or independence or something, and there were a lot of gifts of reconciliation to Tamil Nadu to allow the people of that large state to have their own language in their own schools and many things. And so we draw some lessons from cases that have gone badly in India, like Kashmir, but not from reconciliation that's gone really well, that are actually much bigger cases.
I also appreciate your mentioning women and their role in peacekeeping. And Kashmir is an example where a lot of women from different communities have shared food, they have shared their local knowledge for healing, and which has made the process beyond the conflict situation. And their role can really be brought to the fore, and use them as, negotiators of peace would be very interesting in situations.
Yeah, and in the West as well, I don't think we talk enough about that simple datum that if you count the proportion of the airtime that men and women have in our courts in the West, it's mostly male airtime. It's male judges, male prosecutors, etc. In our restorative justice conferences in Australia, you have slightly more female airtime than male airtime. At least you do in Canberra. And
Nice.
you know, and as mothers of defendants, more than, you know, they're a really big part of that.
Oh, that's something to learn from.
Yeah, I would think that was pretty widespread, that it's mothers who speak up in that situation. Where, you know, whereas if they try to speak up in court about, you know, particularly if they try to speak up and say, well, I agree that, reflecting again on Brian's point, I agree that my Indigenous son did steal something and he broke the law, but the bigger injustice is that this constable assaulted my son and used excessive force in the arrest and confinement of my son, and I want to talk about that. If the mother does that, it's a possibility that that be discussed in a restorative justice. If they do it in court, the judge will just silence them because it's not legally relevant.
And John, that often plays into in our local communities, people believing they've been unfairly treated since colonization, since the invasion, that they really don't want a bureaucratic criminal justice system back in their communities. They get very fearful of it. And it takes a while for restorative justice facilitators to be trained up amongst those people. And when I did that in WA, even the courts rejected our Aboriginal leadership as facilitators. And it's just so sad, extremely sad. It's the ultimate rejection when you're not allowed any longer to represent your people.
My word.
And just to kind of like add on to that, I think, you know, it comes in a lot with this kind of, you know, discourse of the colonization of the mind, where, you know, it's something I saw quite heavily when I was doing my work in Fiji, is when you're in the city centers, there's this expectation that everything should go through the magistrate's court because that is a globalized center of commerce, versus kind of, you know, out in the smaller islands where there's an expectation that will go through customary justice or some form of restorative justice in itself. So it does frame into this wider kind of like colonized discourse in the way that penal codes are switched between countries and an expectation that European justice has to then be done in Australia, Pacific, India, wherever, without taking into account the local circumstances, local communities and small island communities that have different ways of conceptualizing even this notion of kind of, you know, what is justice, away from the adversarial kind of principles in itself, and seeing justice as something much more inclusive.
I guess then, and that leads us on to our paper on smart justice, and where, I mean, today is just a tiny snippet of introducing each other and some of the basic, where we're coming from, I guess. That leads us on to, or to me thinking, oh my God, we're never going to get through stuff here today. It's very exciting just to hear people talking about this.
Well, as I said earlier, well, openly is not here at the moment. We sort of want to use this opportunity to gather everyone back together and sort of run a regular meetings, like seminars or meetings like this, to exchange ideas from what we call the global south or the areas that is not dominated by the whites.
Oh, yes.
So, openly, do you want to talk a little bit about the idea on our on the Asia Institute and what we might want more, what we plan to do in the future, and what we want everyone to help. Open it.
Can you hear us, Upnet? Hello?
Open it.
No.
Yeah. Yes,
you
yes.
hear
I
us?
think my network is still continuing.
Okay.
I lost in between the connection.
I was saying that you want to tell everyone a little bit about the
Can you just
idea.
repeat? I mean,
Yeah, the idea of the institute, the society that we are building.
Institute.
Yes, as I mentioned earlier, so the idea is that if it's going to be based in India, and we will be looking at focusing more on the Asian and the Pacific perspective, it would be something in terms of a registered company with getting funds under the corporate social responsibility. It would be looking at the indigenous practices, both not only in India, but in other Asian countries. We are also looking at focusing on also inviting and having specifically webinars right now, using technology for that purpose of connecting and sharing of ideas and experiences. Maybe also going along with the way in focusing on the current specific issues. Some of those relate to issues of gender-based violence. The experiences that we have, I mean, you've talked about positive deviance. So some of the things that in terms of our tribal communities or at the village level, the solutions to crime, and also focusing on one area that we're looking at is also reducing the increasing use of imprisonment. And we have Dr. KP Singh with us, so focusing on penal reforms as well. We have two of the legal experts also who could not join us, was Professor Jaswal, who has offered to also who is the Vice Chancellor of the Law University at Sonipat, who has offered us to use his university base also. Currently, I mean, this is just one of the aspects, and as I've mentioned earlier, we will be seeking all the from the various countries practices that are there, so that there's a wider exchange of what is happening and developing a framework for restorative justice, which meets the requirements of the community level. And Brian will take that forward. I've just, I mean, I've mentioned to you there's some domestic issue right now. So that's one bit of it. And yes, you know, Facebook and all this increasing use of technology is also one of the hazards that we are finding. And in India, we are noticing increasing use of not only hate speech, but the use of the corporates to control speech as well, not giving a representation to the alternate viewpoint, to the minority viewpoints. And smart technology can also be dumb technology as well. So too much of focus on one aspect of smart technologies can be, we have to look at that with a little bit of reservation, but at the same time increasing access in terms of what we have seen, a dialogue taking place of prisoners with their families. I deal with the prison issue, so through the use of WhatsApp calls that have been there, or through the use of video conferencing, and that opens up another exciting possibility of using of having offenders meet with their victims through maybe technology usage. So there could be some interesting developments and maybe some mini experiments that could take place where we could use technology to reach inaccessible areas and people who we try to shut off as well.
And if I can just come in there, Luke and Lennon, I think it's very important to let the group understand that the shift of the Asia Pacific Forum for Restorative Justice out of a predominantly white colonial nation, Australia, into Asia, and be placed in India, gives us more credibility.
Brian is always worrying that people will see him as a white and dominating the group. I said, no, I really.
No.
We could give Brian the title of the White Godfather. He'd love that.
It's really noticeable when when I'm working with an Aboriginal group. I mean, I wait to be invited to go into a group, and I always have a gender balance, have a female colleague with me, but I'm still very, very much aware that my language to many people represents colonization. And I can't stop that awareness. I mean, I can't just go in and think I'm black. So it's for me, it's a good move to have the forum placed in the heart of Asia. Afghanistan one side, Taiwan the other, China in the middle. It gives us a different perception of how the world looks. It isn't quite as Eurocentric then for the Asia Pacific Forum. That's just my take and my feelings.
I know John need to leave in 4 minutes. Do you have any comments or suggestions on the establishment?
I don't have to leave. I don't have to leave yet. I will have to leave early, but yeah, I absolutely agree with what Brian has said.
That's the trouble of being old and white.
And that's an exciting opportunity, isn't it? We really should be so grateful to the willingness of our Indian colleagues to open that door. Yeah,
and have with ease going out from India, Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia. I mean, our friends in Indonesia right now are doing it very, very tough. Not only to get into the courts, but because the court system is becoming quite overcrowded. Although the prison numbers aren't there, the courts are getting very, very full. They have some really interesting, fascinating ways of doing restorative justice. Again, they're very, very good at that with their young people. But as a nation, there are many problems within it that need healing. Any comments from Taiwan, or is Jim still around?
Yes, I'm around. Yeah.
Oh, there you
go. Taiwan is doing okay. Yeah. The prison population is going down here. Because of the pandemic. Yeah. Yes. They do not send many people. Yeah. Do not send many prisoners into the prison. Yeah. And also we have 4 pieces of restorative legislation last year. The juveniles, law was reformed in 2019, and they allow the court to use restorative conferencing, for juvenile offenders, and the court has been, refused to reform for many years. to use a restorative conference. The prosecutor's office, district prosecutor's office, start the reform to use restorative justice 10 years ago. When after John, reached Taiwan. John started the new reform, in Taiwan. So we are all doing okay, in terms of restorative justice reform, and so the forum is very good, for us, See, I also see that one of the our students, from Griffiths, Mr. Pai,
Oh, yes,
is
yes.
on the screen, He is writing a thesis about drug in Taiwan. Maybe he can talk a little bit about Taiwan.
You know, that's not a bad idea for a research project for the forum to go around Asia and see which countries had a decline in the imprisonment rate during the 2 COVID years, and if they did, whether there was any restorative discourse or safety discourse around what the reason was for that. So we could get UGM as the Taiwan representative to, write a paragraph on what you've just said about Taiwan. If the Indian imprisonment rate came down, and Upnit could or Professor Pandey could write about why that was and whether it had anything to do with an analysis of there's no justice in more people dying in prison. That's not restorative because of COVID. It's a very simple project to do because it's a pretty simple question to ask. I mean, in a lot of societies, there'll be no work to do because there will have been no change in the imprisonment rate. But those where there is a big drop, to ask the why question would be very interesting. A bit of a litmus test.
Good.
Thanks, Jim.
Yeah, it dropped quite a lot. Since past few years. So say about 3 or 4 years, it drops quite a lot. And more restorative conferences are using. By the prosecutors and also the facilitators. So it's a pretty good situation. And no people died, no prisoner died during the pandemic. No, not at all. No one prisoners died due to the pandemic situation.
Just have a quick question, or maybe an update for myself. Why you're saying that RJ is becoming more popular in Taiwan? Do those mediators still take it as a mediation? Do they still like showing off their successful rate?
Even successful rate.
The
successful rate.
For the conferencing.
About 70% are success to meet. Each other. And the Department of Justice, the Ministry of Justice is pushing quite a lot. And also in the past 2 years, the public television is broadcasting quite a lot on the use of restorative justice in not only in district prosecutor's office, gradually also in the court. And this is a very exciting progress. Also exciting signal. It's pretty good. It's not too bad.
Thank you.
maybe a Pai Zhenfu, yeah. He can add a little bit on that, yeah.
In fact, yeah, I did a research about the identity change of a therapeutic community in Taiwan, how they helped Taiwan drug users to change their identity for their treatment. However, I last to do the research about RJ, but the restorative justice, to me, I think the key question we have to think about is, because we're talking about restorative, but what is the goal we want to restorative? It's especially because we all human being. Yeah, we're all human being. So if the goal, if the goal is to restorative to what kind of human being we are, I think it's a key issue we have to discuss. You know what I mean? Because we are different. We are different layer of a perspective of human. The lowest one is individual. That's just me. I just can perceive myself. And then most of us, or most of the research, just touch to the second level. Let's call it maybe a group or a society. We just an individual. The lots of individuals we gather together as a society. The most large group in the world is nation. Most of us just touch to this level. But how about the most, maybe we can say more abstract or more transcendent level? We all as a human being, we all as a human. What is our, can we reach some consonance? What the point we are, what the nature we are. Maybe we should all have to understand this nature so we can restorative to that kind of points, so we can union together.
Yeah.
What I mean? Yeah, because yeah, so it's important. In different culture, we're always talking about this kind of issue in our cultural transcripts, like a Bible, right? So in Chinese, of course, we have our our cultural transcripts. Yeah, yeah. So maybe we have to study from that to let me know what is human being, what kind of human being we should be, or how to become a human being.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I sorry,
John.
I was just going to ask Masahiro whether imprisonment had gone down in Japan.
That's my question too.
Actually, I'm not doing research on Japanese prison, but I'm not sure. But I'm while I was listening, that so I was doing some research on the Japanese prison population. Based on my quick research, it hasn't changed a lot. So it stays, the same. So it's decreasing. That's before the pandemic began. So
it was always low, wasn't it?
Yeah.
In international terms, yeah.
And going back, Keith, into what you were saying.
In India, we had a lot of focus on releasing. I was mentioning in India, there was a lot of focus on releasing of prisoners by the Supreme Court. So we had the high-powered committees, and by December end, there was a real fall in the imprisonment rate, but then it picked up by February. So all the releases that were there, that evened out by February, March. That's what happened.
Oh, yeah.
But John's idea is very good in terms of looking at that, and I've looked at a few states in terms of their imprisonment rate over a period of both the waves of the pandemic.
Everyone's busy searching now.
I was going to respond to Ethan in Taiwan about our notion of individualism, and when we look or want to engage in peacemaking, be it in a small community, family, or nation building, it's that shift away from narcissism into that more altruistic space, walking in others' shoes, looking at their lived experiences. And smart justice allows us to do that, allows us to inquire of the lived experience at any stage. So one of the things is now through the pandemic, what's the lived experience of justice, of fairness, of respect, and has it forced us into being more individuals, or are we taking more of a collective responsibility, a shift towards altruism, a shift towards helping the neighbour rather than just ourselves?
Yeah.
It's that's what I was thinking anyway as you were talking, that we have got into a very much of a framework of individual success based on some very Western concepts. It's not about happiness and it's not about enlightenment. It's more about our wealth and status. Whereas I think that with our smart justice, we could engage people looking at more altruistic notions, be it in bringing people into the courts in terms of their addictions, the support needs they have, their views of the world, the views of the family around them. It's quite exciting.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, we've got a few minutes left. So what I would suggest is that we'll probably make this kind of webinar a more regular event, and probably you might receive email from me or open it inviting you to share your research or experience. Like, to definitely want to listen to Jim on the research, especially on indigenous justice in Taiwan, kind of a topic, and we'll be able to have other people from like Jiva didn't join us today, but she's very keen to talk about RJ in Sri Lanka, for example. Yeah. So, Upanet, do you have any other final question, remark that you want to pose to the group?
Yeah. Thank you so much to everyone for making it for this meeting. And I think we have really, I mean, John has led the way in terms of what we should look at. And we'll make the minutes of this meeting since you have recorded this. So maybe we could also share some of these meetings a little bit later on. And we look forward to your comments, and on the email, we'll share some of this. And I think this would be a regular feature where we will have small webinars and more brainstorming, and looking at the practical implications and researchers. A lot of focus will need to be given on the researchers with this perspective that we have, focusing on our indigenous ways. And it's an opportunity for us now with the use of technology to get connected and to maybe research through different ways as well. So thanks to everyone for making it and for sharing your ideas with us. And thank you so much, John, a brilliant exposition. You have shown us a little, I mean, you've given us a lot of ideas which we can work on.
Well, thank you for your leadership, Upnit, and to
network
you, and to Lennon too, and to Brian for such a long history of leadership. We're blessed with your leadership. Thank you, Upnit.
Thanks, everybody, and take care.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
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 Bye.